It has been another day of fierce fighting in Iraq, where the Sunni militant group ISIS is battling Iraqi government forces for control. Meanwhile, as the fight moves closer to the capital, Baghdad, the United States is sending a few hundred military personnel to help secure its embassy. And the Prime Minister of Iraq's Kurdish region is warning that the country is at risk of falling apart. We will talk with Ambassador Paul Bremer in just a moment, but we begin with CCTV's Tony Cheng, who is in Erbil. And Tony, what is the latest on the fighting? How much of Iraq does ISIS control, and is Baghdad in any danger?
Well, the latest we have is that there's been fighting in the town of Baqa, about 60 kilometers to the north of Baghdad. We understand the ISIS militants have been pushed out at the moment, but that's something that's rather disturbing, I think, for the security forces who had set a line in Samarra further to the north. The ISIS militants appear to have moved just around the outside and outflanked them. We understand there's also been several mortar attacks on the international airport to the west. There's also militants moving in from Fallujah and some activity in the south as well. So there's ISIS activity on three fronts around Baghdad, which will be of increasing concern. Up here in the north, Mosul remains under the control of ISIS. A couple of days ago, they took the border town of Tal Afar. We understand they now control much of this area. We were speaking to refugees today who'd fled from that area. They were concerned both about ISIS but also about Iraqi government bombing, so that's causing a lot of concern as the government tries to retake many of those areas. At this stage, there is no activity, ISIS activity in the east. The Kurdish areas are very much under the control of the Peshmerga, the Kurdish army, and down in the south remains free of militants. But I think the main concern at this stage is holding on to Baghdad.
Tony, how well armed and organized is ISIS?
At this stage, it's very hard to say. Really, most of the information we can gather is from information that they're posting themselves on social media. But we've seen in the last couple of days, as they've swept through into Mosul and further down towards Baghdad, many of the Iraqi army posts and camps that they've gone through have been left abandoned, and those presumably very heavily stocked with guns, ammunition, artillery, and even tanks in some cases. Now, whether the ISIS fighters can use those is another question, but these are hardened, battle-hardened militants who have come from the streets of Syria. They know how to use it. In addition to which, we know that in Mosul they've taken banks with considerable reserves of cash. That'll give them an enormous ability to restock and rearm.
Tony, what can you tell us about the resistance, Iraqi forces taking the battle to ISIS? And we saw those pictures of militias gathering in parts of Baghdad, going to the battlefront. Do you see any evidence that they're there?
Well, we understand some of those militia are now fighting alongside the regular army in places like Baqa, and we've seen hundreds of reserves being called up in Baghdad itself, thousands more coming up from the south. That said, these are fresh recruits. They will not be battle-hardened in the same way the ISIS militants will be. But we've also seen the Iraqi army leaving their posts and frankly just fleeing south as the ISIS militants have moved down. That has been a considerable concern, but I think the feeling is, or the hope is at least, that closer to Baghdad, they'll be closer to their homeland, they'll have far more to fight for, and they will put up a stand before they give up the capital.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Tony Cheng there in Erbil in Iraq.